We're going into the holiday season, and with all of the new GPUs, CPUs coming out here, there's something that's on a lot of people's mind, which is either upgrading their current PC or even building an entire new one. And I was thinking today that a lot of people don't think enough about what their monitor might be, because if you've been sitting on maybe a 1080p monitor for a long time and you're thinking about getting one of these newer GPUs, you might be looking at an upgrade, and there's a few ways you could go. I mean, we've got 1080p high refresh rate, we've got 1440p high refresh rate, and then you could go up to 4K. But one option that many people don't really consider is what's sitting right behind me right now. So I went through a monitor upgrade a little over a year, maybe about a year and a half ago. And I didn't originally set out to get an ultra-wide monitor, but that is where I ended up. And that means I can come at you guys with some personal perspective on the pros and cons of the ultra-wide monitor decision. And I'm gonna break this down into a few categories. We're going to talk about general, just computer use, web browsing, and productivity, but then we'll focus more specifically into gaming, and then also talk at least a little bit at the end about live streaming. For those of you who have been following my channel now, and it's only been around for a month, and thank you everybody who has liked videos, watched videos, and subscribed to the channel. I can't believe that in 1 month I just passed 2,000 subscribers and qualified for ad revenue, so maybe I could actually fund some things to review and improve my production quality. So anyway, thank you guys. But I've mentioned in some videos that I game at 3440 by 1440 ultra wide, and it's also high refresh rate. It's 144 hertz. So from a productivity perspective, let's compare it to a single 16:9 monitor. And I would say that from just a general web browsing and productivity task, maybe you're typing in a document and you want something open next to it as a source, or you just want multiple websites open, you want to watch a YouTube video while you do something else on the other side of the screen. It is a night and day difference between one 16:9 monitor and an ultrawide 21:9 monitor. The ultrawide is just a game changer. It is much, much better, so much more screen real estate. I love it. That's not the only thing you need to consider though, because there's other options. You could get two normal 16:9 monitors. And I've compared it to that too, because before getting the ultrawide, I had two 1080p 16:9 monitors. If I compare it to that, and I still use that setup in my classroom right now when I'm teaching online, and when I compare it to that setup, there are some actual pros and cons. It's less of a clear win. So for actual like productivity, if I want to use a full screen app, like when I'm, let's say, editing a video, I really like having the ultra-wide space. I can see a longer view of the timeline. But if I want to have other files open and websites open at the same time, we get some like overlapping issues and things like that when using a full screen app. Whereas on two 16:9 monitors, I could have one app full screened and then I could have several other web pages and files and things like that open on the other screen. And sometimes having them actually separated out as separate screens is better and more productive and more convenient than having them on a single screen. Now let's compare it to a third possibility. There's a good chance that if you're not building your first PC right now, you already have a 16:9 monitor. And so if you get an ultra-wide monitor, you could still also use your 16:9 monitor. And I actually did that for a while, and I found that it was too wide if I had the ultra-wide and then tried to set another 16:9 next to it. But then I noticed that one of my old monitors actually could vertical mount. In other words, go portrait mode. And when I set a portrait mode monitor next to my ultra-wide, it wasn't too wide to use. It still fit in there nicely. And honestly, for certain types of content, like a long document, or I'm not a programmer, but I did a little programming in college. Sometimes it's nice to see more lines of text than it is to have more width of text. And so having a portrait mode monitor has a lot to be said for it. And having the ultra wide and a portrait mode is really in many ways a best of both worlds kind of experience. So that would be a setup that you might want to consider. So I would say for ultimate productivity, best of both worlds, the ultra wide plus a portrait mode 16:9 is really the way to go. Now I know there's other things you guys can consider, like some people even stack monitors vertically, like ultra-wide with another one on top, or and I haven't experienced a lot of those more rare setups myself, but you could look into those as well. So from a productivity standpoint, I'd say comparing one 16:9 to one 21:9 monitor, all things being equal, the 21:9 wins. I think two 16:9s beat a single ultra-wide for productivity, but I think, in my opinion, the best setup that I've experienced is the portrait mode monitor with the ultra-wide for a two-monitor experience, and with one being wide and one being portrait, different types of content are ideal in either situation. So there's my summary of that topic. Let's talk about why I'm actually not currently doing that right now, because I've actually taken my other monitors into my classroom for online teaching, but I'd actually taken away the portrait mode monitor before that. And that was for a very specific reason, which is desk space, which you should actually consider with the ultra-wide setup. It takes up a lot of desk space. And I also have some speakers here, and I care a lot about audio. And sometimes I like to do audio on both speaker monitors as well as headphones. And one thing that you might not think about is if you are situated directly dead center on your ultrawide monitor, but then you have another monitor next to it, and then you space your speakers out to either side of those, then your ears are not dead center of the two speakers, and this causes an issue with the stereo imaging. In other words, you're not hearing audio coming from exactly where it should be because you're not where the speakers think you are, if that makes sense. Now, obviously, depending on your room setup, you might be able to wall mount the speakers or mount the monitors in different ways or at different heights. You might be able to fit your speakers under the monitors, so you might be able to make it fit. But in my current setup, that was an issue, and it was enough of a trade-off that I was willing to actually sacrifice the second monitor for the sake of better stereo imaging on my studio monitor speakers. So something to consider. Now let's talk gaming. Gaming is so hit and miss, okay? So here's how I'll sum it up. In games that fully support ultrawide, it is great. It is better in just about every situation. I absolutely love it. And when I'm playing a game in ultrawide, and then if I shrink it back down to the normal 16:9 ratio, I notice the difference and I don't like it as much. So, is ultrawide gaming better? Well, again, personal preference, but in my preferences, absolutely yes. Now here comes the huge but, okay? Not every game supports ultrawide. In fact, a lot of games don't, or at least don't fully support it. Now, what kind of issues do you run into? Well, some games literally just will not let you do it. And this can be the case especially in competitive games. So for example, over the summer, I got into Valorant for a while when that first came out, and Valorant specifically will not let you go ultrawide. Now, the reason here is there's a competitive advantage. So let's talk about, so what exactly is it that ultrawide does for you in a game that's so much better? And why would that mean some competitive games would intentionally turn it off? Well, you're looking through a monitor as your window into the world. And in an ultrawide game that's supported properly, it gives you more field of view. So it just lets you see everything everybody else does and more. And because in a game where being able to see something happening is an advantage, some competitive games intentionally turn off support for ultrawide monitors. And that's something to watch out for. In other games, like I believe this is the case for Overwatch, but I haven't played that since I got the ultrawide, but I think I've seen this online, it'll look like it's filling up your ultrawide monitor. Whereas, to be clear, in Valorant, it black bars the sides, okay? So it just black bars it so nothing's happening on the edges. In a game like Overwatch, and again, I believe this is how it works, they instead will take the image that everybody else sees, and they crop down the top and the bottom, so you don't see as much as everybody else. They actually give you a disadvantage, although it does fill your monitor without stretching it, because again, that would be the other option for a game that doesn't support it, is stretching it, but that looks terrible, and you should not do that, okay? That's how some games deal with it when they're intentionally not allowing you to do it. But what about games that sort of support it? So what is the kind of mixed support that we can see? Well, in some games, the gameplay itself works perfectly in ultrawide, but you'll see certain textures. Like I can remember, I think when I was playing, is it Sekiro, the other From Software Dark Souls-y game, but you're like a samurai? In that game, ultrawide worked beautifully on day one, except whenever you'd get the blood texture around the edges when you're getting damage. That fit in a 16:9 rectangle because I think it was just programmed that way. And so it looked awful every time it would pop up. However, keep in mind that most games where there's just some minor issues like that will very, very rapidly get a community-created patch that will fix at least some of the issues for you like that. So many games that don't fully support the ultrawide settings from launch by the developers will get community patches that make them work very well, but there are still some games that don't and never really get patched to work at all. That is one issue. It can be a lot more fiddly, not as just like plug and play. I download my game, I hit play, and everything just works nicely. There's less of that happening in Ultrawide, at least for now, because we're such a small percentage of the gaming market. What is it, like 1 or 2% on the latest Steam hardware survey? Something like that. So what other issues do we see besides those like texture issues? Well, a lot of games have in-game cutscenes, and a lot of times those in-game scenes are rendered at 16:9. So even though the game engine will fill in the rest of your screen space, when you go to a cutscene, sometimes it will letterbox and crop in the edges. And while you're not seeing any less of the cutscene than anybody else did, it can be immersion breaking when you see that happen. A game I experienced doing this that pops into my mind is Jedi Fallen Order. I believe that was the case with that game. Everything was going fine until you hit a cutscene, and it's not the end of the world, but it is a little bit immersion breaking. There's other games where like everything works fine, but the menus don't really stretch, and that doesn't bother me personally. So I do also want to mention, okay, so what if a game doesn't support it and there's no good community patch for it? Well, did you ever consider that you could just run the game at normal 16:9 and the entire game is just letterboxed on the edges? And even though at first when you do that, it's going to be a little bit jarring, once you're playing the game, realize that you are not experiencing anything worse than anybody else who's just playing it on a 16:9 monitor in the first place, right? You're getting the exact same experience they are if they were on a 16:9 monitor that size. You're just not getting that extra, and neither are they. And if you have a monitor that has good black levels on the edges, then if you're in a dark room with those edges just being black, you might not even notice them. And as you play, you really just stop noticing the edges, because I have experienced games like that and it was fine. It's disappointing, though, when you did pay extra money for the extra screen real estate. And that's the other thing that I'm going to mention. A lot of times you are going to be paying more money for these. Now, I haven't researched all the prices on the latest ones, but when I bought this thing, year and a half ago, now certainly you can get cheaper ones, but if you want high refresh rate, like 3440 by 1440, kind of ultra wide, with really good quality monitor, you can be paying a lot of money. I think I got mine on sale for like $850. Maybe the prices come down a bit since then, but I'm just saying they aren't cheap. But on that note, I think too many people spend so much money on the components for their PC to make them run all the games at ultra settings and look amazing and all of that, and then cheap out on the monitor itself, which is actually displaying the image. And this monitor, let alone just being ultra wide, by buying a more expensive, nicer monitor, the color accuracy was something I didn't even think about. Like, the images just look so much better on this than they did on my old 1080p 144 hertz monitor that I upgraded from. So that's something to consider, is maybe you're paying a lot more for the ultra-wide experience, but you're also getting really nice image quality on just a really good monitor. Definitely do your research when you're buying a monitor, compare prices, look for things on sale and all of that, and that's not the purpose of this video. Let me jump in to live streaming for a second, because this doesn't matter at all to a lot of people, but for some people it does matter, and you need to consider this, because I have streamed a little bit on Twitch, mostly just to friends. I didn't take it very seriously or anything, but just for fun. And there's a major thing that I noticed, which is if I'm playing at 21:9, that's not going to fill up my viewer's screen. And they're not going to like that, and it's a bad experience for them. So you might be able to find some sort of a niche market for ultra-wide streaming, but I really don't think that that's going to be a major success story for most people. Keep in mind, you could just, when you're streaming, run the game at 16:9 and stream that. And that's what I've generally done if I stream off of this monitor. But keep in mind then that you paid more to get this ultra-wide monitor that you're then not using if live streaming is your main functionality for it. So keep that in mind. Also, if you're running a single ultra-wide instead of like a dual monitor setup, if you're doing a single PC streaming setup where you normally have your stream being monitored and chat and everything on one monitor, and then you run your game on the other monitor, but now you just have a single ultra-wide monitor, that's a definite productivity use case where having just the single ultrawide is a major, major disadvantage comparing to having two normal monitors. So again, do keep that in mind. I was able to do some portrait mode, like monitoring of myself when I had the portrait mode monitor on the side, and that worked fine for me, although I didn't get to see as big of an image of my live stream. So again, just something to keep in mind if you happen to be a live streamer. Now that we're reaching the end of this video, I just want to mention another thing to consider that I have not tried myself, so I didn't want to make it a major component of this video. But I have heard some people argue that it would make more sense to get a large 4K like OLED TV. Like some of the new LG ones look amazing, although I haven't actually bought one and reviewed it myself. But from what I've seen, some of those look amazing. And if it's a large enough screen, and you really want your 21:9 increased field of view, and OLED TVs have like perfect black levels, well, could you set a custom resolution where it only uses a 21:9 portion of your 4K monitor and basically simulate an ultrawide experience on the games that you want to do that for? And to me, that sounds like a bit of a hassle and not something I'm super into, but I wanted to just bring it up as another option to consider when you're thinking about your monitor purchase. Just throwing it out there, okay? My kid's nap time's just about over, so I gotta stop recording this video, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about, are you thinking about upgrading monitors? Is ultrawide something you're gonna consider? And I really hope you do, because like I said, there's some drawbacks, but there's also some really cool gaming experiences that you can have with this, as well as productivity. I hope you guys have an excellent day. And if you made it to the end of the video, maybe like and subscribe, you know. All right, anyway, hope you have an excellent day.